For his take on the headlines, we're joined in the studio by news commentator Stephen O'Doherty, also Chief Executive of Christian Schools Australia. G'day, Stephen. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
I want to start this morning with a fascinating little article on the front page of The Australian, which looks at Kevin Rudd, the press gallery, new media. It's all very kind of in-house for us, but it is a very interesting article about especially new media.
Well, back in the days of Robert Menzies and the like, the Prime Minister would call a press conference and the journalists would sit there and take dictation and the Prime Minister would give his learned pronouncements.
They'd applaud.
And they'd applaud and thank you, Mr Prime Minister, Mr Prime Minister this, Mr Prime Minister that. And they'd run away and they'd write their copy and they'd, you know, telex it through or phone it through to the copy taker.
Yep.
These days, of course, the PM gets on Twitter and engages with Rove, as he did last week. And there's a very interesting article written by Imre Salazinski, the paper's New South Wales correspondent, about that phenomenon in politics, comparing the change between even the Howard era and the Rudd era. Howard would choose to go on Talkback Radio. Some people called him the Talkback King. So he was the stuff of Alan Jones and John Laws and Neil Mitchell on 3AW. You know, John Howard would always appear and give great lengths of time. Howard himself in this article, which is, by the way, interesting that Howard's been flushed out to talk about this, he says, I'd often give press conferences until the journalists were sick of it and itching to go and file.
It's a great admission. It's a great admission.
Terrific. I'd bore them to death, he was saying, I suppose. But here's Rudd, in the week in which he has this, you know, Oscar affair, comes straight out of that onto Rove, where he's mucking around with Bruno, the fictitious character, and twittering with Rove. And, you know, who would you turn gay for?
And Tony Abbott says, who's the biggest phony?
Yeah,
Poses that kind of question.
That's right. Abbott says, who was the biggest phony, Rudd or Bruno? It was hard to tell.
But Howard on Talkback Radio, I mean, you could just say maybe that's just a period thing, that's where he saw a level of connectedness, and this is what Kevin Rudd's doing now with Twitter.
Look, I completely agree with you. Howard's reason to use Talkback Radio, and I was doing radio, Talkback Radio and other forms of radio during Howard's entire period, from growth right through to... he knew that was a way of getting directly to people. He got the thing that's where the masses were listening. Rudd is looking to the next generation of voters. They need to, I guess, get a generation of young people hooked into voting Labor, and he'll find them on Twitter. He'll find them on MySpace. He'll find them on, you know, watching shows like Rove and not necessarily reading The Australian. Interestingly, Rudd has actually banned Alan Jones. He won't appear on that program. And also, interestingly, I think what's really behind this is a real level of self-consciousness from a very important business point of view by newspapers as to whether new media are going to take their space. So if you turn through to page 13, you find the editorial of the paper, picking up on what John Hartigan, the CEO of News, was saying at the Press Club, absolutely lashing into crikey. And media students should actually take a look at this. This is a great expose of the battle between the old and the new media. Just have a listen to this. This is the Australian's editorial. The only original content Crikey's writers often offer are rants about what they read in The Australian. Crikey sells itself as the future of serious journalism, but it isn't. It doesn't break big stories. It doesn't send reporters around the world. It doesn't analyse policy in detail. And too often it escapes the laws of defamation and the scrutiny of the Press Council. So this is what's behind it. What is the future of media? As a journalist by background, I would say we have to have newspapers. I'm sure you guys would say the same thing.
But they also have to become, as they are to an extent, an online entity, but with a business model that they can make money and survive as an online entity.
And then as citizens in a democracy, we have to say, well, what's the role of the journalist now and where do we as citizens go? I'll go to Twitter to find out what's happening in Iran. When I was bumped last week by the death of Michael Jackson, not that I'm bitter about that.
He's moved on.
Sorry about that, Stephen.
I've moved on. No, that's all right. I then hit Twitter and found out that it actually melted down because so many people were doing the same thing. But you're getting unfiltered. I mean, that's good. Unfiltered content may be good, but it may also be very dangerous. I'm not saying journalists have to filter stuff, but they know where to go. The training of the journalist is to know where to go to find what's right. And to balance things and to weigh and to analyse and to criticise. So a fascinating story. It's the story of the media in our generation.
Yeah, that's right. It's a great story.